every time I had to go to a meeting, I would get there early and I would take the seat immediately next to the most powerful person in the room. And I would like set my stuff up. And then I would hike my chair up as high as it would go. I think between the time my son was 3 or 4 months old till he was about a year old, I was properly depressed. Enough to know that, and you know, through COVID, I reached a point where my therapist was on like a WhatsApp call. Enough to know that I needed to get into the car and drive to Andheri to see him in person because I was in trouble. About 36 when I was first put in charge of a channel. With, you know, some people who, you know, had faith in me at that time saying, okay, you know, let's give her a try.
But you were one of the youngest, I think, in charge of a channel at that point in time. It was like, it was news all over in its own way.
Yes,
I remember.
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal for me. But I was also getting all kinds of like, you know, so people were saying like really weird shit. Like someone came up to me and said, do you know that, so you know that TRPs in India don't measure women.
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
So news TRPs don't measure women. The news TRPs only measure men because they assume that women are not watching anyway and they're all watching Saas Bahu. That's how like backward it is.
Are you serious?
My driver, Arun and I, the three of us. And this was back in the PPE days. Like nobody knew what COVID was. Everybody thought that, you know, you just die if someone was breathing on you. So we would like put on this whole gear every day and we went from hospital to hospital. We went to Rajawadi, we went to KEM, we went to Sion Hospital. We went inside, I went inside the ICUs. And I remember I was the first journalist in the country to go inside an ICU at that time. I was told that I was too young, that I was a woman, too much of a feminist, that I would alienate men, that men would not want to watch my shows because they just won't take me seriously enough, that my voice is too high-pitched. And that the best of all was when management called me in and told me to hire a man to sit next to me to make me more credible.
Oh God.
They were like, why don't you hire a man as your co-anchor who will sit next to you to add credibility to your show? And I was like,
what are we talking about?
Like, what the hell, man? Like, you know? I'll be truly honest. If you're working as a journalist in this country, the question you're regularly asking yourself is, Kal agar raid padega, are you ready? Because that's effectively what's happening on a regular basis. Tomorrow, if you have to spend a couple of weeks in jail, are you ready to do that? And when you have a child who's like 1 year old, it's a little difficult to answer that question.
Faye, I can't even begin to tell you what a pleasure it is to have you on the Mompreneurs Legends show. And I think, you know, you have just been such an inspiration to so many women, so many men out there, and now so many mums, because you have Neil.
I do have Neil. And it's, you know, it's really funny because, and I've had this conversation with you in the past, where I'm most comfortable when someone talks to me about journalism because I feel like I know what I'm doing there. And then a little bit about, you know, running a business. But I feel like I'm winging this mom thing so much that whenever someone asks me for advice, I'm like, really, I'm in no position to be anybody's role model.
Yeah, but I mean, Neil is like, what, about a year and
a year and a half.
A year and a half
months,
now, right? 18 months now. And I remember meeting him. I was telling you, like, when he was a babe in arms, and one of the most adorable babies I've happened to meet.
Oh,
but you know, I do want to, you know, talk about your journey, Faye, right? Because that's the reason we're doing this. You know, there are very few stories out there. And I was telling you backstage, right? When I was pregnant and I was looking for inspirations of entrepreneurs and leaders out there who are expecting, who are mums themselves, right? And who talked about it openly and publicly, what to expect, how to handle these life changes, right? And how to handle being a boss.
Yeah.
There were very few stories out there. And I think your story would be extremely inspiring for people to hear. So I'm going to start off with my first question.
Okay.
You know, Faye, you have been an award-winning journalist. You've now moved to being an entrepreneur. And Beatroot is, I think, your latest venture, which of course we'll know more about. But take us back to Faye, when she was way back in school, way back in, you know, growing up. Like, would your friends, would your family recognize Faye for who you are today from who you were when you were younger?
No.
What were you like?
So I was really mousy. Really mousy.
Not the word I would associate with you at all.
Now I'm Mighty Mouse. So I had glasses from the time I was in the first or the second standards. I was the only kid with these, back then, these large plastic glasses. And I was not very athletic, and I had no hand-eye coordination, right? None whatsoever. If you threw something at me, even now, I'll protect my face like this. So I was really bad at sports, which meant that I was awkward all the time. I started reading very early. And my dad was really into reading. And he, I used to sit next to him on a little chair, and he would give me these books that were ahead of my age. And he would tell me to read, and when I couldn't read a word, to ask him. And this is how it started, and I would just read all the time. So I was that kid who would go to these these aunties get-togethers, right? You're going to some aunt's house and there's got a bunch of people together. I would take a book with me, and then I would find a corner under the staircase, like behind someone's door, where I would be sitting and reading. And when it was dinner time, my mother would come looking for me, because all the other kids were running around and playing and doing their thing, but I would just always be tucked away somewhere with a book. And I was like that for most of school. Like, I was a dreamer. I was very quiet. I was not, interesting or remarkable in any way. For the longest time.
So they clearly would not recognize you for the person you are today.
In fact, I have to tell you this. In my first job, when I was 22, 23, I started off as a behind-the-scenes producer. And I used to produce a show on insurance. And then that show went off air because the sponsorship ran out. And so my boss at the time, who was a reporter journalist, he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, मैं reporting करूँगी. And he said, तुम्हारी तो आवाज ही नहीं निकलती है, काय का reporting करोगी तुम?
But how did you get the conviction you wanted to reporting? Like, how did you even get that thought? Because
everybody cool in that organization was reporting.
So
right?
you were like, maybe reporter.
I will also do it. Yeah. So and then he said, but I can barely hear you when you speak. Like, how will you? Like, what reporting will you do? And I said, no, I will do. Give me a chance. And I started off from there. So I think it's like most of the things in our lives, right? It's about you get here and you're like, okay, now what's next? So now what's next? Now what's next? And when you stop and you look back at that journey, then you suddenly realize how far you've come. But I don't think there was ever, whether I was in school or college or after that, there was a moment where I had imagined the life I have today. And I've just taken one step after the other.
You grew up where?
I grew up in Bangalore.
In Bangalore.
Yeah. So I grew up in Bangalore, school, college, everything in Bangalore. I went to Mount Carmel College, and that was a turning point for me.
Yeah.
That college was really exceptional, and it gave me a voice, and it sort of made me who I am. When I went to college, you suddenly were thrown into this sea of 4,000 women. It was an all-girls institute.
I've been there for competitions, like singing competitions from NLS Bangalore, so I know MCC.
Yeah, you were in NLS in Bangalore.
Yeah,
oh my God, yeah. I loved the law school guys. So, we're suddenly thrown into this sea, and you for 2 years, you don't count at all, because there are people better than you in every way. And you have to sort of swim up to find air and water and become special. And I think that also we had amazing professors. For me, the English department at that time really changed my life, because I was studying commerce and statistics and maths and accounts. And I had an English teacher who introduced me to poetry and writing, and encouraged me to write for the student newspaper, and encouraged me to read more things, and paid attention to the fact that maybe I have a talent in communicating with words. And so suddenly they open up so many other new things. And what we have PUC in Bangalore, and then when I had to choose my degree, the logical thing to do would have been to choose the MBA equivalent, the BBA, which is very new then. And I could have easily done it because my +2 marks were very good. And I switched last moment, and I picked a BA in journalism. And my mother was like, what the hell is this, right? Because back then, only people who had absolutely no ambition did a BA. And I knew that at 18, somehow I knew I wanted to be a journalist. And so I made that switch. But I never imagined myself in front of a camera. I always imagined that I would be writing. My first love has always been radio. And I would have loved to do the news on radio, but we don't have the news on radio in India. So television happened by accident, and somehow,
So Faye, I'm going to again go back to the period before you started off your own entrepreneurial venture, right?
Yes.
I mean, you have become one of India's most credible journalists, right? One of India's top voices. But tell us a little bit of the journey from, the mousy Faye, this, kind of discovering herself in the sea of 4,000 girls in MCC, onto, really finding your voice and building your own personal brand and building your own personal credibility. What was that journey like?
I mean, it took 20 years, so this, people sort of only recognize the last few years when they've seen me. It was a long road. So I started off, like I said, as a reporter who covered the insurance sector at CNBC TV 18, because that sector was too boring for anybody else. Nobody else wanted it. And I was quite happy to do it because I got to be a reporter, and that's all you care about.
And you were facing the camera at that point in time.
I was facing the camera, but it takes you, back then, there was a really high bar on quality, right? And back then, if your work was not good, they would just not carry it on air. So you kept filing stuff that didn't go on air. So there was this pressure to file good stories, which I can tell you for sure does not exist at all right now, right? And I was a very nerdy journalist in the sense that I really got into that sector and I spent a lot of time. And I think that somehow, I generally believe for all young journalists, everything you do adds up to the person the kind of journalist you finally become, right? And I think that time that I spent covering consumer affairs, sitting in consumer court, listening to people complaining that I bought a fridge and it's not cooling, and all of this stuff, made me realize that, and this is the way I approached life, and this is the way I approached my job, that we are all, at the end of the day, consumers of services, of government. We don't expect good roads, we don't expect, in any civilized country, a normal citizen, every citizen actually, should be able to expect clean air, clean water, good healthcare,
safety,
good education, and safety, which is law and order and policing, right? These 5 things. This is my opinion. In India, even the richest person in India doesn't have all 5. Forget the poorest person. Clean air, clean water, good education, good healthcare, safety.
So that basically became almost it's a very interesting reframing of how we think of everything of our lives actually as citizens in a country. And so that became the base for all the work that you did going forward.
So actually,
so interesting.
It was a very long journey for me, in the sense that after that, I was a reporter for a very long time within CNBC. They moved me to Hyderabad. I lived in Hyderabad, I lived in Bangalore, I lived in Delhi, I came back to Bombay. And, as a reporter, you wind up in you're in a farm, you're working with farmers on one day, you're in a company on the other day, you're covering the IT sector on the other day. So you really travel a lot and understand the country better and really spend time on the ground.
Were there moments where, and I think it's amazing that you got the exposure you did. It reminds me of when my mom in the 80s joined the services. There was a whole Bharat Darshan they all had to do, right? But I think you did that in the trenches for many, many years. But were there any moments where you felt that you were maybe treated differently because of your gender, or?
As a woman? No. Not on the field,
That's interesting, and that's great.
So this is the interesting thing, and now I'm not going chronologically on the story anymore, but when I was on field as a reporter, and there are mostly women, by the way, on field, and you're all there together, and you're all in the trenches together, and it's fine. In the boardrooms, on the other hand, as management, many years later, when I finally was leading a channel and I was in management, that's when there was a difference. Until then, there was no difference.
Wow. So tell us a little bit more about that, because I think it's a really important observation.
So I was 36 when I was first put in charge of a channel. With, some people who, had faith in me at that time, saying, okay, let's give her a try.
But and you were one of the youngest, I think, in charge of a channel at that point in time. It was it was news all over in its own way.
Yes,
I remember.
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal for me. But I was also getting all kinds of so people were saying really weird shit. Like someone came up to me and said Do you know that? So you know that TRPs in
Correct.
India
Yeah.
don't measure women.
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
So news TRPs
Yeah.
don't measure women. The news TRPs only measure men because they assume the women are not watching anyway, and they're all watching Saas Bahu. That's how backward it is.
Serious?
Yeah, very serious.
Is that
so they
even today?
Yeah, I mean,
the
I
case?
haven't looked at these TRPs for now 3-4 years, but it was the case when I was around, where they would only, it was considered that news. So, for example, so back then again, cars, phones would advertise on news because they assumed that men were watching and men would make those decisions. Whereas anyone who wanted to speak to a woman, so someone who was selling, for example, Harpic, detergent, Bonvita, will go the Saas Bahu route and go into those shows because they assume women are watching that, right? So on the back end, I was told that I was too young, that I was a woman, too much of a feminist, that I would alienate men, that men would not want to watch my shows because they just won't take me seriously enough, and my voice is too high-pitched. And the best of all was when management called me in and told me to hire a man to sit next to me to make me more credible.
Oh God.
They were like, why don't you hire a man as your co-anchor who will sit next to you to add credibility to your show? And I was like,
what are we talking about?
like, what the hell, man?
Yeah.
Like, you know?
Then why do you hire me in the first place?
Yeah.
But there was someone who bet on you, right, Faye? There was someone
Yes.
who bet on you. There was something that happened. Tell us a little bit more about that journey, because even for you to make, in some sense, history, right? I think that story also, I mean, I'd love to know more about, to be honest.
So actually, the credit goes to the CEO, he's incidentally still the CEO, M.K. Anand, who at that point, I was producing personal finance content for ET Now, which is the business channel. Then they were looking at launching a real estate channel that only covered real estate, also to sort of mop up all the extra resources. So you have a certain number of manpower and equipment that has been bought to run one channel, but you squeeze out of it and then you run two. That was the idea. The response from the audience was tremendous because at that time, media had sort of at 9 o'clock become very nationalist. So we had actually done a study where there were more conversations about Pakistan than they were about what's happening in India. Yeah. And no one was focusing on, the issues that we were facing. And at some point, it made more sense to flip the entire channel from being focused on real estate to being focused on citizens and consumers. So it was flipped to Mirror Now, the tagline of which was "You First," and that's where that came from. So the whole channel then got converted to what the Urban Debate stood for, which is why it was called the Urban Debate, because it was on a real estate channel. So the 9 o'clock show stayed the same, and everything else sort of took that.
And it was groundbreaking for its time, and even today, I think. I mean, it's been like it's one of those things you look back at and you're like, that really spoke for citizens, and it was extremely empowering, I think, in many ways.
Yes,
people.
It was extremely, and it was a heady place to be back then because.
But then even at that point in time, when you run probably one of the most successful shows, one of the most, I think, well-known channels out there, you're being told to get a male co-host to basically add credibility. So how did Faye D'Souza actually deal with that?
So I would say yes.
You would?
Then do whatever the hell I wanted after that. But I did a couple of things. But I basically weeded out all color from my wardrobe. I got the hair, the jewelry, the look down to like a pat. It was the same every single day. It would not change at all. And I took out anything happy from it. And it just became so I dropped my voice 2 octaves from like this to this. And I would talk like this. And I would so a lot of people say oh my God, you sound so calm. It was because I was speaking at a lower register. So, and so I was very aware, and I don't know now in retrospect whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but I was very aware.
Just going to ask you that actually.
Of how my voice sounded at all times. So I would make it a point not to sort of become high pitched, not to lose my cool, so that I could keep control over my voice and not let it become high pitched, because I'd been told so much that men are watching and men will find a shrill voice irritating. So I would always keep it really this thing. And these were all, I mean, you can't tell when you're watching on the other end, but these were all conscious like decisions, and it was like.
But tell me a little bit more about that. I think you already touched upon this, and I think it's an extremely important point. You know, we talk a lot about authentic leadership and being your most authentic self, and you know, I mean, all of this stuff, right? And here you were. While of course I think you did many, maybe 90% of things the way you wanted them done, there was this 10% that you pretty much like kind of reframed to fit the narrative that you knew you had to meet to succeed, right? Someone watching you today, what would you advise them? Would you like,
so
how would you?
In retrospect, see, I had two choices, right? I could have either gotten a man, or I could have bridged
lesser of the two evils, basically.
Bridged whatever gap I thought existed that needed to be bridged. And I chose, and I think as women, we're constantly faced with these decisions, right? It becomes, and I remember whenever I had to go to meetings within the organization, there would always be this question of what to wear, right? Because so guys, the men would just show up, right? They would all have these jackets in their offices. They would throw on that jacket and they would show up to a board meeting or to a meeting with top management. But for me, it was a question of, do I put on makeup or not put on makeup? Because if you're on television, people are used to seeing you with makeup, and so if you show up without makeup, you're just going to look like something the cat dragged in. And now you're thinking, I need to look serious enough to be taken seriously among all these men, but I don't want to look unkempt. But I don't want to look dolled up so that they don't take me seriously. And this is infuriating, right? That we have to think so much.
I mean, imagine the mental overhead on
just
when
men don't have
all
to
of
think
these decisions,
all, right? I mean, and also I think that the amazing thing about women is that we like very quickly hit a rhythm with everything. Like I would keep a pair of shoes under my desk, and I would change wherever I needed to. I would have certain clothes in my in the office to change into if I needed to. I had also devised like this basic look of just kajal and like little something here and there. So I don't look like I've rolled out of bed, but I also don't look like, I've
superbly glamorous and like you have time to waste on these things, basically.
Yes. So all of these things, and I think it's horribly unfair that women have to think these things. I hope it's better now.
So what would you advise someone, like let's say, who's building their career or already in a leadership role? What would you advise them from your perspective today?
So I would say, don't overthink it. Do whatever you need to do.
So keep your eye on the goal and basically, get there in a way that feels most comfortable, most authentic to you.
I mean, I'm just saying, I think what I'm saying is that we put too much pressure on ourselves. We judge ourselves too much. And the whole world is already judging us. Right? So give yourself a break. If you need to wear higher shoes or broader shoulders because you feel more powerful when you walk into a room, then do it. Do whatever you need to do to feel more powerful. I used to do this really odd thing. Every time I had to go to a meeting, I would get there early and I would take the seat immediately next to the most powerful person in the room. And I would like set my stuff up. And then I would hike my chair up as high as it would go because I'm a short person, right? And the room would be full of men. So I would like then hike my chair up all the way so that I'm like at the same height. And with a jacket at the same, like I'm occupying the same space as them. And then there are everybody knows those meetings where you try to say something and someone's constantly cutting you off. And so then I would stand up and go pour myself a glass of water and then just forget to sit down.
I love that.
And then I would remain standing, and when I was talking standing, then nobody could cut me off. And it's all just like, it's all like power play, but you do whatever you have to do.
I mean, I had a professor in HBS called Amy Curry, who's written this entire book on, power postures and how to be heard in meetings. And I think you kind of just completely nailed it just there by I love this. I'm going to try this hack, by the way, on getting water.
One of the reasons why I wear jackets, I was just telling your producers, because I can get, I could pin the mic onto the jacket and I didn't have to reach into my own clothes, especially when you're on live television and you just run into the studio and sit down. You don't want to have to shuffle too much. But also, honestly, like the women in the 80s did with their shoulder pads, I just feel like it makes me broader in a room full of men. And so I do it. And that's what it takes for me.
Correct. And I want to talk now a little bit on a bit of a different gear, right? I mean, and we are fellow moms, Faye, and you were expecting Neil when you started off your entrepreneurial venture, or in between. Like, tell us a little bit about when you found out you were pregnant and what stage in your professional journey, your entrepreneurial
let me take
journey
you just one step back, right? So I left television, which was a surprise for me. So overnight I found myself without a job. And then I.
But you took that decision consciously, in some sense, or
I was given, like, there weren't too many choices on and
sure.
If I wanted to sort of keep my credibility, then that was the decision on the table, so I took it. And the turnaround is very quick. So basically, you assume that when you there is a conversation and there is a notice period, and I was just told ki kal se mat aao, so, and then the next day, the stuff from my office was just like 11 years in an organization, packed up and boxed and sent to my house. The next morning, my house had these boxes in it. That was just my whole office packed up. And I never went back.
And can you, if I ask this question to everybody, your highest highs and your lowest lows, was this one of your lowest lows?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. I can't even imagine that.
For the first few weeks, it was about, we'll take this on legally, and how can they do this, and something, and then after a point you lose all of that, that steam, and then you're thinking, what am I going to do next? Yeah. And I think for me, the very real thing was, and I think every part of your life brings you to a reckoning, right? I had spent so much time and energy on my career that I literally had nothing going on. I mean, I would just like my husband and I would just pull the door shut, and we would go to our respective jobs and come back at the end of the day and not pay attention. Like, the house was just a place we slept. And then I remember having like real anxiety every morning, because my husband would get ready for work. And there's this period in the morning where everybody in the building is sort of just leaving, taxis are picking people up, kids are going to school, and people have showered, and I was just sitting around my pajamas. I had nowhere to go. I had nothing to do for the first time in like 17, 18 years. There was nothing to do. And I started panicking, and I needed to see a therapist because I realized that something was seriously wrong. And I've talked about this before. But what happened then is my husband was really able to also help me focus in that way. I have a favorite restaurant, and I would just go to that restaurant every day with A4 size papers that I would spread out on the table. And I would actually re-examine everything. Like, do I want to be a journalist? Is there another profession that I can, take up? Is there something else I can do? What legacy do I want to leave behind? What do I want to be remembered for? What kind of person do I want to be? What is my contribution to society? What is my contribution to my community? What is my community? And so all of these things I sat and I actually wrote down until I found, that I have no employable skills and I have to be a journalist at the end of the day. There's nothing else for me to do.
And I mean, the world couldn't have afforded to have lost you as a journalist. I'm so glad you came to that realization. But anyway, yes.
So, I decided a couple of things. I decided that I wanted to be a journalist. I decided I want to do journalism which has dignity at the center of it. So I really fixated on this word dignity, which is in the preamble of our constitution. It's something that is assured to all of us that we can all live with dignity. And I had come out of that very toxic system which does not afford dignity to its reporters, it does not afford dignity to the guests who are being interviewed, to the anchors themselves who are not dignified on a daily basis, and worst of all to the people who are watching. Who you are stressing out on purpose every night before they go to bed can't be good either, right? And I said, no, you know what? I mean, consider how, for example, television media treats people they cover. Whether it was the time that they chased Deepika Padukone in that car, or the manner in which Rhea Chakrabarti was dealt with, or most recently Aryan Khan. And, I could just sit here and make long lists about how people have been treated and these are all non-political, examples I'm giving you. Sri Devi, when she passed away, and the questions that were asked, there was no evidence to any of that. And no apology followed. just not dignified in any way. And so for me, I wanted to build something that has dignity in the middle of it, and that we would always stay with that and treat everybody with dignity and do this in as much of a wholesome way as possible. And then from there, I started working. And a couple of my colleagues from television then left and followed me, and we put together like a 4-member team, and we said, okay, now we're going to get an office, and we've got this business plan, we're going to raise money, and COVID hit us. And so then we were sitting in our houses, there was no office, there was no money, we were just sitting there, and we were like, what are we going to do? And it just felt, and there was this story very early days in the first phase of COVID when there was a story about Sion Hospital, and dead bodies were lined up and nobody was cleaning it up and stuff like that. And I just, I called this colleague of mine, Arun, and I said, listen, we need to go. We need to find out what's going on. And then we got permission from the cops. It was not that hard to do. So my driver, Arun, and I, the three of us, and this was back in the PPE days, like nobody knew what COVID was. Yeah. Everybody thought that, you just die if someone was breathing on you. So we would like put on this whole gear every day. And we went from hospital to hospital. We went to Rajawadi, we went to KEM, we went to Sion Hospital. We went inside. I went inside the ICUs. And I remember I was the first journalist in the country to go inside an ICU at that time. And the doctors were like, "Are you serious? Are you kidding? You're going to go inside?" And I said, "How else will I show what's happening if we don't go inside?"
But that was such a everybody was so scared. I mean, like it was a traumatic time for everybody. Yes. For you to be that brave in a way, Faye, did that come from? I mean, I think just the mission that you've always had. Where did that bravery even come from?
See, journalists are just morons, okay? Which is, I think a friend of mine put it very well. Which is when you're a journalist and when someone hears that there's, say, a blast that's happened somewhere in the city. Or
everybody runs away in the opposite direction, but you will go.
You're like, okay, show me, what's happening. You just can't be left out of the action. That's one thing. It's just wired into your DNA. And I just felt at that time that, this was the plate banging period, right? There was a lot of plate banging.
I remember that.
Happening.
Yes.
And nobody was doing any real journalism and telling what is really going on the ground. And I just felt that the hospitals were such, people were dying in service and nobody was paying attention. And someone had to tell that story. And I was like, let's just go and see. Let's just go and see what's happening, because unless you go and see, you can't, And so we went out and we saw and we reported, because that's the job.
That's amazing. And that's really, really brave. And I think also the heart of what you said, right? Bringing dignity back into reporting, into coverage, into the lives of people. It would have played a very, very important part into at least bringing the truth of what good is happening, but equally what needs to be improved at that point in time.
We did that story. So we did Sion Hospital, we did Just Look Hospital, because I wanted to show the difference between private and public sector. KEM Hospital, and KEM Hospital really, it went viral, because that's the universe we live in. And then it was really funny, within a week's time, every single national channel had sent their reporters to hospitals. And for me, that was the change. That all of those stories were now being told. That, these doctors and these nurses, and we were finally telling their stories. So, that sort of butterfly effect, I think, was really cool.
So, Faye, this is all happening in the peak of COVID, right? Yes. And I mean, like I was just telling you right now, I mean, you're right. I think there's a bit of insanity into, I think, something being as mission and, purpose aligned as what you have set out to build. And so what is the journey that, was it Beatroot then? Was it something else?
So it was I always knew I wanted to start my own organization.
What did you call it at that point in time?
Beatroot. The name
has been still Beatroot.
The name has been on ice now for 3 years. We've just launched it now. Because at that point we were just chasing the wheel, right? There was during COVID, news was happening to us, and we didn't have time to launch anything. We were just putting out the news. I started doing Good News Tonight, where I would just give out the news every night just to calm people down. Then we started doing Just the News, where I would just put out the news every day. I was doing a bulletin from my living room saying this is what has happened today in like a calm fashion, which doesn't show like upsetting visuals. We're actually posting the news on Instagram. And then my team and I, we were a 3-member team, we became we became the go-to for information
Yeah.
during COVID. And it was hard because the information that we were digesting in order to put out that news was really difficult. I had a key team member quit for mental health reasons. And someone who had worked with me for nearly a decade, who was my lead producer, just stopped and said, you know what, my therapist has said I can no longer do this. I have to now find another profession. And is now in like fiction production because you just wore him out. And there was this one time, and you know, for me, the cracking point was the bodies in the Ganga, right? That was like, for me, that was, and my husband Sagar was working, so he had occupied the guest room and I would occupy the dining table. That's how we divided the house. And he came out of the room and I was sitting there typing news and there were tears streaming down my face, right? Yeah. And if you work in news for long enough, you learn how to sort of let it process through you and not let it bother you. But at that point, it had reached a tipping point and he said, dude, you need to like shut it down for a bit because this is not good. So all of this stuff was happening. And we didn't really have the time to launch a brand and to actually like, you know, raise funds and get an office and stuff like that. We were just working. We were just doing what needed to be done at that point. And then COVID sort of ended and I was like, okay, now we're going to launch a brand and now we're going to get an office. And then I got pregnant and then I was like, okay, wait, hang on. And so we put another like hold on it.
No, but tell me a little bit more about this, right? Because I mean, you just, I think, been through this entire wave of covering probably one of the most momentous, most traumatic moments as well of human history, of our certainly of our generations, right? Yeah. And you'd come out on the other side as a team, right? And you'd actually help millions of people. I remember that moment, Faye, because everybody would go to your page because you're right, it was the most credible source of information. Then you find out you're pregnant, and then you're like, no, let's not make the most of this opportunity in some sense, or this wave that we have of goodwill with us. So what do you mean? Like, what do you mean you put a pause?
Priyanka Basin of Design Stack had designed our, I had the name for years.
Yeah, you
Priyanka
mentioned
designed our logo in 2020.
Wow.
You know, in February 2020, before COVID hit us. And so we were just sitting on it. And then when I got pregnant, we had to make a call and I said, hey, you know what? It doesn't make sense to get an office if I'm not going to go to that office, right? If I'm going to be on mat leave. It doesn't make sense to spend that kind of money because at that point, like every rupee counts, you just overheads and rent and all of that. We continue to work from home. And then I have a great team of journalists, like 3 or 4 of us. But they had reached a point where they were able to post the news on Instagram really well, to a point where people really didn't know it was not me. And they were doing all of the right things like credibility, writing it well, fact checking it and all of that. And so what we did was I continued the brand associations that I was doing till the absolute last minute to be able to make enough money to keep it in the bank so that I could go on leave and the team can continue posting the news and still get paid their salaries until I come back. So that was, that was the common minimum program that we worked with. So we just keep this going.
So you were literally like the true CEO who was basically ensuring there was money in the bank to pay the team. And then you put things a bit on simmer mode, it sounds like, right?
So what we did was basically everything just continued as it was. So there was YouTube, there was Instagram, we were posting the news, we were writing the news. All of this was happening. But we didn't launch anything new because I didn't want to disrupt anything. We just kept it as is while I went on mat leave.
And how long do you take your mat leave for?
I took 7 months.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Really good for you, Faye, because I mean, all the folks I've talked to right now, they've either had to come back, in 3-4 weeks, people have come back in 2-3 months. No one's really taken, I mean, there are physical changes your body goes through as well.
I was just not ready. I was just not ready. And I was very aware of the fact. So my son's a bit of a miracle. I was told I couldn't have children, and then here we are.
Yeah.
And so I was very aware of the fact that this is the only child I'm going to have. Right. So I wanted to sort of like really be around for that first 6 months and not complicate that time.
Yeah.
And just be able to focus and sort of take it all in, because I knew that it was moving so quickly.
Right.
And,
And Faye, we were talking about this offline right before this, right? Which is that this entire series is about people who are actually the leaders in their organizations, right? They're actually the bosses. The buck actually stops with you. If you, for instance, hadn't continued their brand contracts, right? There'd be no money to pay salaries, right?
Yes.
So for you to make that decision to take the 7 months off, were you completely out of action, or were you back in a couple of weeks doing things that kept the show running financially? Like, what was that structure like?
So we had enough money in the bank to keep the show running, because
so you planned for that.
So we had done really well, because what had happened interestingly during COVID also. Advertisers also switched the way they were communicating. They were using influencers more. They were using online more. So I had done, we had done a series of associations that were slightly long term, which were entirely online, which were low cost. They didn't need a studio, so it was done out of my living room. I had moderated a bunch of discussions from my living room, for which we had charged money. I had done a lot of these motivational speaking gigs, for which we had charged money from my living room.
Fantastic.
Up to here, nobody could tell I was pregnant. So all of that money was already there. I had done a show for Al Jazeera, which we had billed for, but that money was there. We received a grant from Google for being, a startup of promise in the news sector. So that money was there. So there was enough money in the bank. And I was very proud of how well we had done. We had actually done a turnover before I went on mat leave of 2 crore rupees for a 4-member team with no office. Shamelessly shooting on our phones. We didn't even bother to go out and buy a damn camera. Okay. And so there was enough money. We were really happy with how well we had done. So we said, okay, let's not rock this boat. Let it continue. I did a couple of things. Within, I think, about 2 months, 45 days of having the baby, I did a couple of things from home, which was not too difficult to do, because you just mic up and you do some stuff in front of the camera, but I didn't do anything too stressful. I did a lot of writing stuff for Vogue, and for I this and that, some smaller stuff. But I sort of ring-fenced myself, and I'm happy I did.
Yeah.
And it's really funny. I've had this conversation with you about how when you're pregnant, everybody's like, oh, do you want something? Do you want to put your feet up? How are you feeling? This, that, something or the other. As soon as this baby comes out of you, everybody's like, so when are you getting back to work? Right? Or, oh, you've lost weight. Or, oh, So the conversation suddenly flips to how quickly can you become the person you used to be? And how can we go back to as if nothing had happened? And you feel a lot of pressure saying, oh, should I be going back to work? Am I not doing enough? And also, I think as much as we exist on social media, it does us the disservice of making us feel constantly inadequate. Because you're looking at other people, like, oh my God, look how well she's done. Look how much, and other moms who also had babies at the same time, you're like, look how much weight she's lost. And she's gone back to looking like pre-baby, and look how much how much this person's putting out in terms of
content
output
or
content
output,
or whatever. And oh God, I need to do more. I need to start doing videos. I need to start doing this. So there's a lot of that. And quite frankly, from my personal experience, I took the 7 months, and I'm really glad I did. I wouldn't do it any other way.
And which is why I started by saying that's amazing that you were able to do that and that you did that, because I fully hear you. There's a lot of pressure as well on people to go back to the old paradigm, when actually the paradigm has completely changed, and as we know it, right? But you talked also in another conversation we had earlier, right, on Mom's Talk, etc., about postpartum and what that journey was for you. Do you want to touch upon that a little bit?
Sure.
And
I think that I've had this conversation with Neha a bunch of times, the whole 4th trimester, right? That happens after the baby comes out, and nobody talks about it. I don't think we talk about it enough. I also think that women who don't have babies are not interested in this information, which is why they walk into this whole thing completely uninformed, and like, what the hell happened to me? But it's hard. And even if you are, I was 40 when I had my baby, which means that life stops surprising you at a certain, you reach a point where you're like, okay, I know how to handle a surprise from life, but it's hard because it takes a real toll on your body. It takes a toll on your entire identity. And I remember being really pissed at my husband because his life didn't change at all. And he was going to work, and he was traveling at the top of a hat. So it was very actually, listen, so I have to be in Bangalore on Friday. And I was like, You know, and he got to go around saying, I have a son. And I was like, no, you don't have a son. I have a son. My hair's falling out, right? I have a son. I don't know what you have. And it's unfair that he gets to share credit for 5 minutes effort on like on a 1-year project. But, and I think that also, you know, that particular period it's very difficult to equal parent in that period because there's so much more physical effort taken from the woman than there is from the man. And if I were to look back now, and I think between the time my son was 3 or 4 months old till he was about a year old, I was properly depressed. Enough to know that, and you know, through COVID, I reached a point where my therapist was on like a WhatsApp call.
Yeah.
Enough to know that I needed to get into the car and drive to Andheri East to see him in person because I was in trouble. And I sat with him for 90 minutes and I think I cried for 80 minutes out of it because it was just like, you know, it was just so hard. And I'm glad I'm proud today to tell you that I knew that I needed help and that I got the help. And I took the time to piece myself together in order to become, you know, in order to continue to be me. For my son, for myself, for my business, for my family, you know, and I wish more women knew to be able to ask for help when they need that help. And and there's this thing that everybody says to you, which is that you've had this miracle baby that you wanted for so long. Why aren't you happy? Like, how can you not be happy? This baby is so beautiful. Why aren't you happy? So you suddenly feel like, am I being ungrateful in some way that I'm not happy because I'm depressed? Is that, you know, is that mean to myself? Like, am I being ungrateful for this beautiful child? And it's not. It's just like hormones that are just, you know, screwing with your brain. But you have to, you know, which is why I think that we need to talk about this more. So women who've been through it need to talk about it so that somebody on the other side of that lens who's going through it will be like, oh, okay, I'm not a weirdo. This is normal.
Yeah.
And I just need to pick up the phone and ask for help. And even if you don't know a therapist, ask your friend for help. Reach out to other women who have had children.
Yeah.
Ask them, say, this is what I'm feeling. Is this normal?
Yeah.
You know, and this is how I figured it out as well.
I mean, I think it's really important what you say because, you know, too many times, and I was talking to someone else and they were like, I said, how do you advise women to reach out for help? What she told me was that the minute you feel you need help, reach out at that moment. I mean, there's no other perfect moment. It's basically you need help, right? But, you know, when we look at the support system, you know, and Faye, today, you know, you're half a year out of that period maybe, right? And of course, there'll be times when you'll continue to need support, and we all continue to need support actually. The support structure to actually have you meet your peak potential, your ambition for yourself, right? That is something you have to constantly put into place. Yeah. So for instance, Sagar's role, right? Your maybe family's roles, team at home, team at work. Tell us a little bit more about how you set that up because, you know, you're on a completely different wicket today. You're extremely ambitious about where you want to go with Beatroot, but you need the structures to set you up to meet your peak potential. What do the structures look like for you?
There's a nanny who I love.
And you were telling me about how much you love her.
I really love my nanny. I spoil her silly because I'm terrified she might leave me. So I'm in a relationship with a nanny, really. You know, so Neil's obviously more independent now. He's not being breastfed. He's very comfortable. See, I got lucky in the sense that this is an independent baby. He was always independent. Even when he was like almost a newborn, he didn't want to be held or carried or cuddled. He wanted to be set down on the bed so that he was like free and comfortable and able to sleep. And we were able to build on that and sort of move him to his own room very early, in his crib, in his room with his nanny. So if I, for example, travel overnight, he's okay. And I'll, you know, on one hand, that makes me feel like a really shitty mom, which is really weird, right? But on the other hand, he's an independent child. He's well taken care of. And I have to keep telling myself this, right? So I tell myself that, is my child safe? Is my child being cared for by a person I trust? And is my child being cared for by a person who is following my parental philosophy? The answer to all these three things are yes, then I'm a good parent. Right? I don't need my child to miss me to show that I'm a good parent. And Sagar and I have this great understanding where if I'm out, either traveling for work or I'm, I've stepped out very far away from home. Like right now, I'm really far away from home where I can't rush back if needed. He works from home on that day. So one parent is always there. So in case the nanny needs, in case there's an emergency, there's a parent to take those decisions, which I think is really important. So that has given me the ability to work late, to travel, to step out of the house more often. And I think that that's the elbow room that one really requires to be able to, so that, hey, I've gone out to do something and if I get delayed, it's okay. Because that panic of, oh my God, that's really scary.
So I think
but I'm aware of the fact that there are many, 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 many women in this world who do not have the luxury of live-in help. And so either you have someone who's helping you who will leave at a certain time of the day every day, and so you have to be back by that time. And I want to acknowledge how stressful that is and how difficult then it becomes, because even if you manage to, in an ideal world, divide the physical duties, and let's be honest about the fact that is not. It is very rare that happens in Indian households. The mental load is on the mom. Because when we step out, it's about, is the nanny here? Is the dabba ready? If groceries are, there's milk. You give all of those instructions and then you step out of the house, and if one piece of that sort of Jenga puzzle comes down, then the whole day comes down, and it's still on you to sort of like piece that back together again. So I think that that's a lot of pressure on Indian women.
I want to get on to my second last question, which is, I remember us messaging each other. You were in New York, I was in Paris.
Yes.
And I think Beatroot had just launched, and you were messaging me and you were like, already 50,000 downloads completely organically. And I'm like, wow, this app is going viral. So what's next? What's your ambition with Beatroot? What's next for you, professionally as Faye? Like, what are you excited about in the coming year?
So we've got this app. So let me just tell you the solution. The sort of problem that we're solving for on this app is the fact that we have this entire generation of young people. And by young, I mean, everyone who's no longer watching cable TV, right? Where you were no longer reading a newspaper because it's inconvenient. It doesn't fit into your lifestyle. You're not watching television because you don't trust it anymore, and not without good reason. And so we're not being informed adequately. Now, if you look at your options online, you've got options that are largely hate-filled. So if you were to read the news on, say, a Twitter or an X, you would be wading through hate before you even find out what happens. Like first you're reading like 20 people giving gullies to each other, think what are they fighting about? And then you find out what is really ki hua kya hai. And I find that the online sources, the aggregators right now are pushing so much clickbait and so much like Bollywood and who wore what to which airport. And there's a lot of that instead of prioritizing what is important and what you need to know. So one of the reasons why we named it Beatroot is because it's good for you, and you have to like have a certain amount of vegetable every day, and you can't survive on like McDonald's and butter chicken. It's not a functional way to survive. So as citizens, we need to know what's going on around us in a responsible way that will make us better voters, it will make us better citizens, it will make us better, members of society. And so it's important for the news to be prioritized into national news, international news, business, science and technology, environment, rights, legal stuff. So you need to be informed of all of these things before you start your day so that you can function. So one of my issues also with algorithms is that if you happen to, for example, like football or like a certain something, you like 40 stories on football, right? And now you finished reading football, you don't know anything else that's happened. You know more about Messi than you know about
it's an echo chamber than that you basically create with algorithms.
So what we're doing on Beatroot is that we're putting out the news that's fact-checked, that is rewritten in a way that's easy to understand, and that is curated and prioritizing this is important for you. Our next phase, which circles back to my first love, is we're going to include an audio feature on Beatroot where I will read the news to you every morning. In my absence, a team member will read it to you. So you'll be able to just play it and just go about your day. When you're driving or you're getting ready for work or you're making your breakfast, you can listen passively to the news in the background. And phase 3 will be to launch video on the app, where we will put out video content, we'll put out in-depth interviews, we'll put out all of that. But my sort of pet ambition, and I'm really driving our tech guys crazy, is to be able to launch multiple languages before this time next year, so that someone who opens the app can choose a drop down and say, I want to read in Kannada, I want to read in like Malayalam, I want to read in Telugu. And see, because we figured out we're already fact checking the news, we're curating the news, we are rewriting the news. We should be able to use AI to translate the news and then look at it once, clean it up, put it out. And so make it faster. That way it's more accessible, because the philosophy, the principle will stay the same. The language can be different. So we're just reaching a larger number of people.
So Faye, before we kind of wrap up this episode, I just wanted to ask you, what has been your highest high, like your highest moment where you're like, okay, Faye, you've made it?
Oh, wow.
When has that happened?
So see, I've never had that moment. There have been a series of like I said, right, there are steps.
Right.
So while I was on television, we managed to pull off a couple of things that I was personally very proud of.
Yeah.
So we campaigned, there is a place off the Eastern Freeway. If you've ever been on the Eastern Freeway between Chembur and town, or if you look at the, on one side there's Vadala, on the other side there are these eyes of Mordor with like smoke bellowing out of their chimneys. So that's a place called Mahul, and they were people who were moved from the Thansa pipeline in Ghatkopar by the government into that neighborhood and given housing there from a slum. Because they were so close to the refineries, they were all getting sick. There was somebody with cancer in every household. There were children born with like massive sores on them. It was shocking. It's happening under our noses in Mumbai. One of my colleagues and reporters, when I was at Mirror Now, went out and reported on that story, and it just became personal to me. And we spent 2 years campaigning that they need to be moved out of there because they were all literally dying. It took 2 years. Even after I had left television, the Uddhav Thackeray government then finally relocated them. Wow. And for me personally, that was like a moment where we had actually managed to make a difference to someone's life. We also campaigned, which was the first video of mine that ever went viral, was when, we opened the doors of your normal taxis, your Tata Indicas that were used as taxis, and showed people where the child lock is, so that when you get into a cab by yourself, you can make sure that the driver has not switched the child lock on and you're not trapped inside the car. Because as a woman getting into a cab all the time, this is like important. So we put out that information, and we campaigned with various state governments and with central government about this. And Nitin Gadkari, who is the transport minister, decided that when cars are registered as taxis, the child lock will get dismantled. And so that ability to lock women inside the backs of cars will no longer be possible. And for me, if we had saved one woman the trauma of that happening to her, that's like a whole career's worth of fighting, like one for me. When GST came in, my team and I ran a campaign to remove tax on sanitary napkins because it's such a essential. And at that point, it was being taxed as a luxury item, which is ridiculous. And it was quite a decision at dinner time to talk about sanitary napkins, because as you can imagine, everybody says like, dude, people will change a channel on you. How can you? And sanitary napkins are considered such a woman's thing to talk about, right? But it was a decision that I personally made. We campaigned repeatedly. And then finally, when Piyush Goyal was in charge of the finance ministry, he removed the tax on sanitary napkins, which for me, again, was like this massive thing, because there was a lot of trolling that happened. There was a lot of targeting that happened at that time. Like organized trolling that happens to women in journalism, that was really traumatic. But we stuck with our guns and we said that, no, this is the right thing. And it worked out. Recently, post the baby, the two things that really sort of gave me that little energy boost to keep going was we won a Ramnath Goenka Award for our work during COVID. And the Ramnath Goenka is one of the most prestigious awards for journalists, and it's given only for real on-ground reporting, right? It's not for how popular you are or what your Instagram following is, or who owns your channel. It's actually, and I was sitting there with like all of the big organizations, and here we were, two of us who had shot it literally on our phones when we'd gone into KEM and Dharavi. And that really gave me hope that we're really onto something and we're doing something well. This other really odd story, Mount Carmel College just completed 75 years. This was their jubilee year. And I was invited to deliver the memorial, the Founders Day lecture.
Wow.
For me, that was a really big deal because like I told you, when I went to that college, now 25 years ago, it was the 50th jubilee, and they had this big blowout event that I auditioned for and didn't get selected for. And I was really sore about it, that I didn't get selected in anything. And they'd invited 50 former students, alumni, and they'd given them sort of a felicitation for doing really well and making the college proud. And I had, at that point, promised myself that when this college has another Jubilee celebration, they will invite me back, and I'm going to work hard enough to be counted. And the fact that and it was just like a couple of weeks ago, that it happened now sort of just like filled me with so much joy and so much happiness, I can't tell you.
No, and what I love about these examples that you give, right, of where you felt that, your work mattered, is where you've created the most impact in the lives of people, right? And I think the last example you gave is a beautiful one where you've kind of come a full circle from that mousy 17-year-old to being like Faye as we know her. So I think my last question, right, Faye, there are going to be, hundreds of thousands of mums, of course, but also dads, men, students watching this particular episode. What message do you have for them?
I would say everyone's journey is different. And we should give ourselves time to heal and time to grow. And I think that it's really important that we treat ourselves with kindness, especially women and girls. Because the world is already hard enough on you about everything. About what you wear, where you go, who you meet, what you eat, what you don't eat, right? The jobs that you have chosen, the way you choose to do your jobs, whether you have children or don't have children, or the kind of mother you're choosing to be after you've had your children, right? So there are those who tell you that you're wasting your talents if you're not going out and rejoining work as quickly as possible, and there are those who will tell you that, oh, you need to stay home and be with your child, and it just never feels enough. It just, I recognize that look now. When I go to the playground, I see another mom, I can see what she's going through because I've been there, and I've realized that this is this kind of pressure we feel from the time we are young girls, because it's just never enough. And we need to first be kind to ourselves and not wait until you are thinner or fitter or, in some way more acceptable to society before you start to be happy. Just take a minute to be happy right now. Take a minute to be joyous about how far you've come. Take, regular opportunities to look at your own journey and to be proud of yourself. Make room for yourself to be depressed, to be sad, to be anxious, to just need a day. And it's okay to need a day. And I think that, every woman, irrespective of what it is you're doing, you are setting an example for women around you, and you're being watched by younger women. And so when you're kind to yourself, you teach other women to be kind to themselves as well. And I constantly tell my team that family comes first. You take that time to go see a parent. You take that time to answer your parents' phone call. You take that time to be with your kids. Because I feel that in our ambition to be really amazing, we're leaving behind a lot of people. We're leaving behind moms who are caring for young children. We're leaving behind people who have elderly parents who need care. We're leaving behind people with disability because we're not making room in our systems for them. We're leaving behind members of the LGBTQI community because we're not creating safe spaces for them to be themselves. We're leaving behind people who are depressed and anxious and who have other issues because we just feel that the only way to achieve in this country is to be like peak performance at all times. And I think that the more women we have leading organizations, being entrepreneurs, being founders, the more chances we have of creating spaces where we can include more people and we can create more diverse organizations and we can create kinder organizations that are kinder to each other and kinder to ourselves. And as it has been proven, whenever a woman is leading something, it's just better. Right? And we will be able to, I think, one organization at a time, change the way things are being done. And we don't need to be, sort of testosterone filled. And I watched the Barbie film last night, and there was one dialogue that really struck me, which is ordinary Barbie, who's just getting through her day, right? She's not amazing. She's just like, she's just normal. She's just ordinary Barbie, and that's okay. So just like give yourselves, and everybody is extraordinary, but I think the meaning of ordinary Barbie is to allow yourself that one ordinary day on a regular basis where you're just like, you know what, I'm just a regular person. I don't need to be like super mom, super achieving, amazing all the time. I don't need to constantly bounce back. I don't need to constantly prove that I'm amazing, because we're doing this. The exhaustion comes from the fact that we come to work and we want to behave as if there is no child. And I'm as like sharp and available as everybody else. And then you want to go home to a home that behaves like there is no job, where everything is as perfect as it would be if you were a stay-home mom. And it's impossible. It can't be done. It's just not possible. And you have to allow it to not be perfect on a regular basis, because otherwise we just kill ourselves. And a lot of times we're putting that pressure on ourselves only. Like if something in my child's life is not perfect, I feel like it's a personal reflection on me.
And it's not.
And
as we all know.
Yeah, but we just like pile all of this on all the time. And I think that I'm circling back to the fact that I think we just need to be kind to ourselves and say that it's okay. It's, I used to be, my house used to be really at right angles at one point. Everything was in this perfect place. And now there's a child in the house. So there's like a tractor, a truck, a bus, something. There's stuff everywhere. And I'm just like, if it's clean, I'm okay with it. I'm all right with the Legos on the floor. It's like, there's nothing I can do about it. So I think that at some point we need to just like let some stuff go. So
I couldn't agree more with you. And I think it's such an important message you're leaving with all of us. And Faye, I just want to quickly there's so much to unpack in this amazing conversation, right? But I think one thing that really stands out to me about what you just shared so frankly and so freely is about bringing dignity and humanity back, right? Humanizing motherhood, humanizing entrepreneurship, humanizing people and like subjects of news, if you will, right? And humanizing the news itself. And I think that is so important. It's such a rare quality, to find in today's world. And, I thank you, Faye. Actually, I thank you for bringing in, with your characteristic candor, I think the journey you've been through personally as a mother, as an entrepreneur, and as a leader. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
So Faye, we're going to come to a bit of a fun part of the show, which is the never have I ever. The 6 questions we're going to ask you. You have to answer, I have not.
Yes.
And feel free to give any explanation you might want for your answer. Okay, so the first one. Never have I ever toned down my point of view after my child Neil was born. You have. Explanation or?
So, I mean, this the whole thing, about just being so like on all the time and being like so sharp and being so, we put pressure on ourselves to be perfect. I think after Neil was born, I acknowledged the fact that I'm slower. I'm also heavier. I'm slower, and I allow myself to be slower. I allow myself to be softer and not put so much pressure that, oh my God, it has to be done like a certain. Like, there's a colleague of mine who used to work with me in television who's constantly looking at me like I'm a different person because I'm not so like, oh, how did we make this mistake? We should have not. I'm just like, okay, is it a mistake? Figure out how it went wrong, make sure it doesn't happen again. Chalo, aage badho, So I have changed that way quite a bit.
Very, very interesting. And next question. Never have I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Never have I ever put my life in danger to report a story. Yes. We know that already. Okay. Never have I ever feared for my child's safety because of my profession.
So I have not, so there's not one particular instance, but it just makes you stop and think a little more, so.
Yeah. I can totally imagine.
Because now there's more at stake than there was earlier.
No, I can totally imagine.
I mean, see, I'll be truly honest. If you're working as a journalist in this country, the question you're regularly asking yourself is, "Kal agar raid padega, are you ready?" because that's effectively what's happening on a regular basis. Tomorrow, if you have to spend a couple of weeks in jail, are you ready to do that? And when you have a child who's like 1 year old, it's a little difficult to answer that question.
Like I said before, Faye, you're truly brave. Okay, a little bit on a lighter note. Never have I ever used my storytelling skills to create amazing bedtime stories for my child.
Oh, I totally have. I am constantly making stuff up. I make up rhymes. I make up and he's really picking up on that skill. So he's responding to that as well, which is really fun. So we have this bedtime routine where there are a certain number of books that have to be read. Otherwise, he will not go to sleep. And there are a certain number of rhymes and grandparents have to be called. And that's a very, for me, that's my window. That's like a little, secret time.
Yeah. Lovely. Never have I know the answer to this as well, but I'm still going to ask you. Never have I ever done something that goes against my core beliefs to fit in. I know you've not, so that's why I know the answer. And my last question, never have I ever felt like quitting after receiving online threats, trolling, the works as we know it to be in India.
Well, I've thought about it. I felt it. There are many moments where you're like, why do this? It should be easier to just take a job in a shop and just live a more peaceful life. I remember when I had, after I delivered the baby, my brother called me, and my brother rarely offers me advice. He's very, do whatever you want to. He's a couple of years younger than me, and he said, the world can look after itself for a few months. You don't have to champion all the time. So there are moments when I think does it have to be me? Do I have to? This is my fight. Is this a hill I want to die on, or should I just
But you do it. You do it. I mean, you don't back down, right?
Yeah.
So Faye, here's a small hamper our team at the Momsco has put together especially for you.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I think it has some of your favorites
yes.
from what I could hear you say.
Yes, this one.
There you
I
go.
love this one.
There you go.
This is a vitamin C face.
Thank you very, very much for being on our show again.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a toddler. A lot of this happens in my house. But this is amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.